Your translator is lying. One waiter, one life-saving warning. The bread was wrong. Not badly made, not stale. Just wrong in a way that Nathan Cole could not explain and could not shake. He sat at the table near the window of a small restaurant in Tbilisi, Georgia, and stared at the basket of flatbread the waiter had brought without being asked, and something at the back of his mind kept pulling at a thread he could not find. He picked up a piece anyway. He chewed. He set it down. Outside the window, the old city moved the way old cities always do, without hurrying, without explaining itself. Men walked with hands folded behind their backs. A woman in a bright orange headscarf carried 2 plastic bags of vegetables and spoke loudly into her phone. A boy no older than 10 sat on a low wall and watched pigeons with the serious expression of a man reviewing paperwork. Nathan had been watching the street for 10 minutes, and it had already told him more about this place than the 3 travel articles he had read on the plane. He had been in Tbilisi for 1 day. He would be here for 4 more. He had come for work, a series of meetings about a construction partnership that his company in London was considering. Slow and complicated discussions that required someone present on the ground, someone who could shake hands in person and look people in the eye and report back with more than spreadsheets. Nathan was that someone. He was 34 years old, moderately good at his job, and completely unable to speak a single word of Georgian. This is where Victor Hale came in. Victor was seated across from Nathan now, studying the menu with the focused calm of a man who had studied many menus in many countries and found all of them essentially the same. He was 41, slightly built, with neat dark hair going silver at the temples, and a way of dressing that suggested he took himself seriously without wanting you to notice. He had been recommended to Nathan's company by a business contact in Baku, described in a short email as reliable, discreet, professional. Nathan had spoken to him once by phone before flying out. Victor had a smooth, unhurried voice and used it sparingly, which Nathan had taken for competence. Victor worked as a freelance interpreter and fixer. He had been doing this for 16 years across several former Soviet countries, accompanying business people, journalists, occasionally diplomats, through the verbal maze of languages that English-speaking Westerners almost never learned. He spoke Georgian, Russian, Azerbaijani, and passable Turkish. His English was perfect, almost too perfect, the kind that arrives not from childhood, but from deliberate and disciplined study. He never used contractions. He said, "I will," instead of "I'll," and "I cannot," instead of "I can't." And the effect was slightly formal, in a way that felt trustworthy, like a doctor who washes their hands in front of you before touching anything. Nathan had decided almost immediately that he liked Victor. This was the first mistake he would later identify, though at the time it felt like a reasonable conclusion. They had spent the morning in a conference room on the 4th floor of a glass building near Rustaveli Avenue, working through the early stages of what would be a long negotiation. Nathan had asked questions. Victor had translated them. The Georgian counterparts, 3 men in dark suits who smelled of good coffee and old cigarettes, had answered at length. Victor had translated the answers back, always with the same measured pace, always selecting words as if from a tray, never fumbling, never pausing to search. Nathan had left the meeting feeling that things had gone reasonably well, which in early negotiations is the best you can hope for. They had chosen this restaurant for lunch because Victor knew it. He knew most restaurants in the center of Tbilisi by this point. He said this the way a person says something that is simply true, rather than impressive, and Nathan believed him. The place was not large, maybe 14 tables, most of them occupied. The walls were terracotta with old photographs hung at slightly different heights, as if the person doing the hanging had kept being interrupted. The ceiling was low and dark wood. From somewhere behind the kitchen door came the smell of roasting garlic and meat fat, and something sweet Nathan could not name. It was the kind of restaurant that had clearly been the same restaurant for 30 years and intended to remain so. A waiter appeared. Not their waiter. Theirs had already taken their order. A quiet young man with short hair who had written nothing down and disappeared. This one was older, maybe 60, compact and deliberate in the way he moved, as if he had learned long ago that unnecessary movement was a form of waste. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and had the kind of face that had once been very handsome, and had traded that for something more interesting. He was carrying a tray he set on the stand near the next table, And as he did, he looked directly at Nathan. Not at Victor, at Nathan. He said something. 4 words, maybe 5, in Georgian, looking steadily at Nathan while he said them. Nathan looked at Victor. Victor smiled and said, "He is welcoming you. He says he hopes you enjoy the food." Nathan nodded and said thank you in the direction of the waiter, who by then had already turned away and was heading back toward the kitchen, and Nathan thought nothing more of it for the next 6 minutes. The food arrived, and it was extraordinary. This was the word Nathan kept reaching for. Not good, not delicious, but extraordinary, in the way that food is extraordinary when it is made by someone who learned to cook, from someone who learned from someone before them. No recipe, no television, just accumulated knowledge, passed hand to hand, down a line of generations. He ate khinkali, the Georgian dumplings, fat and soup-filled, twisted at the top, which Victor showed him how to eat by holding the twist and biting the bottom carefully, tilting the whole thing so the broth stayed inside. He ate something with walnuts and herbs that he had no name for and did not need one. He ate the bread that had seemed wrong, and discovered it was, in fact, perfect. Victor ate neatly and spoke occasionally, describing the neighborhood, the history of the restaurant, a legal dispute between 2 families that had something to do with the building next door and had been ongoing since 1994. Nathan listened and watched the street and felt the specific, temporary contentment of a person who is far from home, doing something unfamiliar and finding it good. Then the older waiter came back. He stopped beside their table and spoke again, more this time, still directed at Nathan. There was nothing rude or intrusive in his manner. He was not raising his voice, but he was leaning very slightly forward, and his eyes were carrying something that Nathan registered without having a word for it yet, an urgency without theater, the look of a person who is saying something they mean. Victor answered before Nathan could ask for a translation. He answered in Georgian, smooth and quick, and whatever he said made the waiter straighten slightly. The waiter glanced at Nathan one more time, then gave a small nod that could have meant agreement or resignation, and walked back toward the kitchen. "What did he say?" Nathan asked. "He said the lamb today is especially good," Victor said, reaching for his water. "He wanted to make sure you had tried it." Nathan looked at his plate. He had not ordered lamb. There was no lamb on the table. He said nothing. He picked up his fork and continued eating. But he watched the door to the kitchen for the rest of the meal, and 3 minutes later the older waiter came through it again, crossed to their table without slowing down, and spoke directly to Nathan a 3rd time. This time the words were quieter but more compressed, the way a sentence becomes when everything unnecessary has already been cut out of it, and what is left is the thing itself. Victor put down his fork. He replied in Georgian, and this time his voice had changed in a way Nathan could hear but not describe. The pleasant, unhurried tone was still there, but underneath it something had tightened. The waiter did not answer Victor this time. He looked only at Nathan, and he held Nathan's eyes for a moment that lasted slightly longer than comfortable, and then he said one more short word or phrase, and walked away, and did not come back. "What was that?" Nathan said. Victor picked up his fork again. He is an old man who has strong opinions about what foreign guests should eat. It is a local thing. They take hospitality very seriously here. He wanted to be sure you were satisfied. Nathan looked at Victor's face. The face was perfectly calm. The explanation was perfectly reasonable. Nathan looked at the door through which the waiter had disappeared. He thought about the look in that man's eyes. The look did not match the explanation. A man trying to recommend lamb does not look at you the way a doctor looks at a patient when there is something in the test results that needs to be said carefully. Nathan ate the rest of his meal. He did not say what he was thinking. He was in a foreign country, in a restaurant he did not know, with a translator he had met 24 hours ago, and everything Victor had told him so far had proved accurate. He set down his fork. He had eaten more than enough, and still he stared at the last piece of bread in the basket and tried to understand why the room had changed temperature without the windows opening or closing, and why his body was doing the particular thing it does when something is wrong, and the mind has not yet caught up. He left a tip that was too large because he did not yet know the conversion well enough to be precise, and he followed Victor out into the afternoon sun, and he did not look back through the window. He almost did. He decided not to. This was the second mistake he would later identify, though at the time it felt like simply moving forward. Victor walked ahead on the pavement and was already talking about the afternoon, the schedule, the second meeting at 3 o'clock, the name of the contact they would see, and Nathan listened and said yes in the right places and nodded. And all the while the older waiter's face sat in his memory like a stone dropped into still water, still sending out rings. He thought about the way the man had bypassed Victor both times, had spoken past him, through him, aimed his words at Nathan directly as if Victor were not there, or were a piece of furniture, or were an obstacle. He thought about Victor's first translation. He said he hopes you enjoy the food. And the second. He said the lamb today is especially good. Nathan had not studied Georgian. He had no ear for it. He could not catch a single word in any of those sentences and hold it up to the light. But he knew what the face of a man making a restaurant recommendation looked like. And he knew what the face of a man trying to warn you looked like. And those two things were not the same face. They reached the corner and Victor stopped to check his phone, and Nathan stood in the afternoon sun and breathed in the smell of car exhaust and roasting chestnuts from a cart nearby, and thought about the afternoon meeting, and the contracts, and the reason he was here, and he told himself that he was reading too much into the expressions of a stranger in a restaurant, that this was what happened when you were in an unfamiliar place, and could not understand the language, that the mind fills the silence with whatever it fears. He told himself this. He almost believed it. Victor looked up from his phone and smiled and said, "The car is 2 streets over. Should we go?" And Nathan said yes, and they went. And the stone in the water kept sending out rings. The afternoon meeting lasted 2 hours and covered ground Nathan had not expected, moving faster than the morning session, in ways that felt encouraging but also slightly unsettling. The way a river moves faster when the bottom is getting shallow. Victor translated without interruption, without hesitation, without anything that seemed off or incomplete. The Georgian men in their suits nodded and spoke, and occasionally laughed at something that Victor translated as a pleasantry about the weather. Nathan watched Victor's face all afternoon, and found nothing wrong. He went back to his hotel that evening, and sat at the small desk near the window, and looked at his notes from both meetings, and they were good notes, clear notes, the kind that would make a solid report. He ordered room service because he was tired, and because he did not want to navigate another restaurant alone, and he ate the food without tasting it and stared at the notes. Then he opened his laptop. He had no Georgian, but he had a translation application, and he had a question he needed to ask in Georgian, or close enough to it. He typed into the application, "There is something wrong at this restaurant. Please leave." He stared at what the application gave him in Georgian script. He looked at it for a long time. He had no way of knowing if what the waiter had said was anything like that, but he had no way of knowing it wasn't either. He closed the laptop. He lay on the bed with his shoes still on and stared at the ceiling and listened to the city outside the window and thought about a man in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, who had come back 3 times, who had looked him in the eye 3 times, who had been dismissed 3 times by the smooth and unhurried voice of Victor Hale. He thought about the 3rd dismissal, the one where the waiter had looked only at Nathan and not at Victor when he said his last words. As if by then he already knew Victor was not going to help him. As if by then he was saying the thing not because he expected it to land, but because not saying it was worse. Nathan lay on that hotel bed for a long time. He did not sleep well. And when he finally did sleep, he dreamed about nothing at all, which was somehow worse than dreaming about something, because the nothing felt like waiting. The second meeting with the Georgian partners had been scheduled for 9 in the morning, and was moved to 11, then moved again to 2 in the afternoon, and by the time Nathan sat back down in the glass conference room on Rustaveli Avenue, he had already spent 5 hours in his hotel doing nothing useful, reading the same email 3 times without understanding it, ordering coffee he did not finish, standing at the window watching the city with the focused blankness of a man who is thinking about something he cannot name. Victor had picked him up at 1:45, precise as always, dressed in a different jacket that looked exactly like the previous one, and the ride to the building had been pleasant and brief, and Nathan had said very little, and Victor had noticed, and said nothing about it, which Nathan added to a list he was keeping. The afternoon session moved into specifics. Numbers, square footage, delivery timelines. Nathan had prepared for this and followed it as well as he could, given that every substantive exchange required him to wait for Victor to translate, a gap of seconds each time that made the rhythm of the conversation feel slightly like watching a film, where the sound and the picture are almost but not quite aligned. At one point, the lead Georgian partner, a large, quiet man named Georgie, who wore his suit as if he had been born in it, said something that produced a response from the other two men at the table. Not laughter, not quite, but a sound that acknowledged something shared between them, a flicker of understanding that moved around the table and excluded Nathan completely. Victor translated it as a comment about road conditions in one of the outer districts. Nathan looked at Georgie's face. The face was neutral now but had, a half-second before, been doing something more complicated than road conditions. Nathan wrote in his notebook,
Translation delay on Georgie's comment.
Checked faces.
Does not match.
He did not show this to anyone. He simply moved the meeting forward. By the time they left the building, it was 4:30 and the light had gone amber and sideways over the city, and Victor suggested dinner. A different restaurant tonight. One he also knew. Also good. And Nathan said he was tired and would eat at the hotel again, and he would see Victor in the morning at 8. Victor said of course, and the car dropped Nathan first and Victor last, which is when Nathan noticed that Victor's hotel was in a different direction entirely from the one Nathan would have assumed, which was not suspicious in itself, except that it added to a shape that was beginning to form in the back of his mind, not yet clear enough to be called a thought, but present enough to be called an unease. In his room, he did the thing he had been building toward for 24 hours. He sat at the desk with his laptop and opened a browser and searched for the name of the restaurant where they had had lunch. He found it in 8 minutes. It had a small online presence, a booking page, some photographs, a rating. He found the address and confirmed it was the right place. Then he searched for the phrase, translation fraud to Tbilisi, and read for 40 minutes. What he found was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was ordinary. A pattern that appeared across a dozen forums and traveler boards, and one academic paper that he could only half access, because it was behind a paywall. The pattern went like this. A translator or fixer in a country with a language barrier is hired by a foreign business person for a sensitive negotiation. The translator begins selectively altering what is said, not lying outright but shading, omitting, reframing. Sometimes this is in service of a third party who has paid the translator to ensure the negotiation lands in a particular way. Sometimes it is the translator acting alone, extracting what they can from both sides by controlling what each side hears. The business contact closes on worse terms than they understand, sometimes much worse. Nathan sat back in his chair. He thought about the comment Georgie had made that afternoon, the flicker of shared understanding that went around the table like a current and stopped before it reached Nathan. He thought about the waiter. He opened a new browser tab. He found a translation forum and posted, using an anonymous username he had never used before, a short question. How do you check if your interpreter is translating accurately in real time without them knowing? Then he closed the laptop and stood at the window for a long time. The city was moving into evening. Lights were coming on in windows across the street. Someone 3 floors below was laughing at something, a full and genuine laugh, not polite, not performed, and the sound of it traveled up through the warm air, and Nathan heard it, and felt how far from home he was, not in miles, but in some other measurement, for which there was no unit. He picked up his phone and found the contact details for his company's main office. His director, a careful woman named Caroline Marsh, had given him a standing instruction before he flew out. Call if anything concerns you. We would rather hear a false alarm than miss a real one. He looked at the time. London was 2 hours behind. It was just after 7 here, which made it just after 5 there. Caroline would still be at her desk. She worked until 7 without being asked. He called. She answered on the 3rd ring. He told her everything. The meetings, the translations that felt slightly wrong, Georgie's expression, the waiter at the restaurant, and what he had tried, 3 times, to say, and what Victor had converted it into, his search that evening, the shape that was forming. Caroline was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then she said, "Have you signed anything?" "No." "Have you agreed to anything verbally in the presence of the Georgian partners that could be construed as a commitment?" Nathan thought carefully. "I don't think so, but I wouldn't necessarily know." She was quiet again. Then, "I'm going to make a call tonight. We have a contact in Baku, someone who recommended Victor originally. I want to know more about that recommendation. Don't sign anything tomorrow. Don't agree to anything. Can you find a way to slow the meeting without it being obvious?" He said he could. She said, "And Nathan, that waiter, the one in the restaurant, is there any way to go back?" He said he had been thinking about the same thing. She said, "Go back." He said goodnight and ended the call and stood at the window for another long time. Then he picked up his jacket and his room key and went downstairs and out into the evening and walked back toward the restaurant. It took him 20 minutes on foot. He went the wrong way twice because the streets in the old city did not conform to the logic he kept trying to apply to them, curving and narrowing in ways that seemed personal rather than geographical. He passed a church lit from below, with warm yellow light, and a doorway of a bakery that was just closing, and 3 cats sitting on a wall in a row like a committee. He found the restaurant. The window table was occupied by a young couple who were not looking at their food. The same photographs hung on the wall at the same slightly different heights. The smell of garlic was still there. He went inside. The young waiter who had taken their order the previous day was behind the bar polishing glasses. He looked up at Nathan with polite and professional neutrality. Nathan said, "Is the other waiter here?" The older man, white shirt. The young waiter looked at him. He said something in Georgian and then switched, slowly, to English, with an accent so thick it arrived in pieces. "Luca, he is." The young man made a gesture with his hand that indicated a back room, or finishing, or done for the day. Nathan said, "Can I see him, please?" The young man considered this. He disappeared through the kitchen door. Nathan stood at the end of the bar and looked at the table by the window and thought about sitting there yesterday with his bread that seemed wrong, and his food that turned out to be extraordinary, and his translator who had been, all along, doing something other than translating. The kitchen door opened. The older waiter, Luca, came through it still in his white shirt. He stopped when he saw Nathan. His expression shifted in a way that was hard to read. Not surprise, not exactly, but something adjacent to relief. Nathan had no Georgian. He had the translation application on his phone. He held it up and typed and showed the screen to Luca. He had written, "I think you were warning me. I think my translator was not telling me what you said. I came back because I need to know what you told me." Luca read the screen. He read it slowly, and then read it again, and his face, that once handsome face that had traded its beauty for something more durable, did something complicated and quiet. He held out his hand for the phone. Nathan gave it to him. Luca typed for a while. The typing was slow and deliberate. One finger, each character chosen with care. Then he turned the screen back toward Nathan, and Nathan read what it said. He read it standing at the bar of a restaurant in Tbilisi, with the smell of garlic in the air, and the young waiter pretending not to watch from the far end of the bar. And he read it twice. And then he put the phone very carefully into his pocket, and stood very still for a moment. Then he looked at Luca, and said thank you. Luca nodded once. It was the nod of a man who had done what needed doing, and did not require more than acknowledgement for it. Nathan walked back to his hotel. The streets made no more sense on the return journey than they had on the way there, but he stopped going the wrong way, because he was no longer thinking about directions. He was thinking about what Luca had typed, which was this. Your business partner in this city has already agreed to sell the rights to a third buyer before your meeting is finished. Your translator knows. He is being paid to keep you at the table until the papers are signed and the deal is closed without you. I have seen your translator here before with men from that company. I recognized him yesterday. I tried to tell you that you were being kept in a meeting that was already over." Nathan walked and breathed and thought. He had been in Tbilisi for just over 30 hours. He had almost signed his company into a deal that was already settled before he arrived. He had been kept there, comfortable and well-fed and confidently handled. by a man with a smooth voice and a perfect command of a language Nathan did not speak. And the only thing that had interrupted this, the only crack in the surface, was an old man in a white shirt who had come back 3 times, and a young British businessman in a foreign city, who had, for reasons he could not entirely name, looked at that man's face and believed it over everything else in the room. He got back to the hotel and called Caroline again. She answered immediately, which meant she had not gone home. He told her what Luca had typed. There was a longer silence this time. Then Caroline said, "Don't meet with Victor tomorrow." Nathan said, "I know." She said, "We'll handle this from here. You don't owe that meeting anything." Nathan sat on the edge of the hotel bed with his jacket still on, and thought about Victor Hale's smooth and unhurried voice, and the tray of words he selected from each time, and the careful, professional neutrality of his face across every table they had shared. And he felt something he could not call anger exactly. It was too cold for anger, too clear. It was the feeling of having understood something that had been true the whole time. He said, "The man who warned me, his name is Luca. Is there anything we can do for him?" Caroline said she would think about it. Nathan said goodnight and hung up and sat without moving for a while. Outside his window, the city was fully dark now, and the lights of it were scattered and warm and unconcerned with him, which was exactly right, because the city owed him nothing and had given him more than he had known to ask for. He thought about the shape that had been forming in the back of his mind since the restaurant, the shape that was not yet a thought, but an unease. It had a name now. The name was, "They almost had me." And underneath that, quieter, running like a current below the surface, "They would have, if not for him." The morning came gray and close, a low sky sitting on the city's shoulders like something tired. Nathan was already dressed when his phone lit up at 6:50 with a message from Caroline. Short, direct. The way she always wrote. Confirmed. Third-party agreement was signed 4 days ago. Victor Hale has a registered financial relationship with the intermediary company. Legal is involved as of this morning. Stay in Tbilisi one more day. We may need you to speak to someone from our legal team there. Nathan read the message twice and set the phone face down on the desk. He ordered coffee and drank it at the window, watching the street come awake. A woman opened the shutters of a small shop below. A delivery truck parked half on the pavement, and the driver carried boxes without hurrying. The boy who had been watching pigeons the previous day was not there yet. At 8 o'clock exactly, his phone rang. Victor Hale. Nathan looked at the name on the screen for a full 4 rings. Then he let it go to voicemail. Victor did not leave one. At 9, Nathan received a call from a number he did not recognize, which turned out to be a woman named Patricia Reeve, a legal consultant his company had on retainer in the region. She had a quick, exact voice that suggested she had no patience for the non-essential and had arranged her life accordingly. She said she needed to meet him in person and gave the name of a hotel lobby 2 streets from his own. He walked there in 12 minutes. Patricia Reeve was already seated when he arrived, a compact woman in her late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a leather folder open on the table in front of her. She stood to shake his hand and wasted no time. She told him what she had found in the 12 hours since Caroline had called her. The third-party buyer was a real estate development firm, with significant investments in the districts being negotiated. The agreement they had signed with the Georgian partners 4 days before Nathan arrived was conditional. It would not be valid if Nathan's company formalized a competing claim during the negotiation window. Victor Hale's role had been to keep Nathan in the meetings, appearing to make progress, while ensuring that no formal commitment was made on Nathan's side, buying time for the condition to expire. "In 2 more days," Patricia said, her finger on a date in the folder. "The competing claim window closes. The third-party agreement becomes unconditional. Your company would have had no legal recourse." Nathan sat with this. "What happens now?" he said. "Now we act before the window closes," she said. "Your company files a formal notice of negotiating intent today. I have the paperwork. That extends the window and voids the condition in the third-party agreement." "And Victor?" Patricia closed the folder. "That depends on what your company wants to pursue. There is a clear case. The evidence of the financial relationship with the intermediary is documented. Whether you want to expend the energy of a legal action in a jurisdiction where you are also trying to build a business relationship. She paused. That is a decision above my pay grade. Nathan nodded. He understood. He said, the Georgian partners, Georgie and the others. Did they know? Patricia looked at him steadily. That, she said, is the part we do not yet know. He signed the paperwork she put in front of him. She countersigned and dated it, and said she would file it before noon. She closed her folder and stood, and shook his hand again, and said she would be in touch through Caroline, and left. Nathan sat in the hotel lobby for a while after she had gone, surrounded by the particular ambient warmth of a hotel lobby in the morning, the sound of a coffee machine, someone rolling a suitcase across marble, a man in a good coat talking quietly into his phone near the revolving door. He thought about the word that had been sitting in his chest since the previous night, the one that was too cold to be anger and too clear to be fear. He thought about the meetings, 2 days of them, the conference room with its glass walls and its view of the city and its 3 men in dark suits who had known, or some of them had known, that the thing Nathan believed he was building was already being built elsewhere for someone else, and that Nathan's presence in the room was not a negotiation, but a delay. He thought about being handled, being fed, being shown the beautiful old city through the windows of a car driven by a man whose job was to keep him comfortable enough not to ask the right questions. He thought about bread that seemed wrong and could not explain itself. And then he thought about Luca. An old man who did not know Nathan Cole from any of the other foreign business people who had passed through that restaurant over 30 years, who had nothing to gain from any of this, and something real to risk, however small, however unlikely, the risk of involving himself in something that was none of his business and had no return, who had come back 3 times anyway. Nathan sat in the lobby a while longer. Then he stood up and went back out into the gray morning and walked, because the city was there, and he was in it, and his legs needed to be doing something. He thought about what it meant to choose to say the thing, when no one was asking you to say it, when saying it required fighting past someone else's smooth and professional dismissal, when the person you were saying it to could not understand you, and the only thing you had to offer was your face, and your persistence, and the fact of having come back. He thought about trust, about how fast it forms and how wrong it can be, and how the signals we use to build it, the good suit, the unhurried voice, the perfectly constructed English sentence, are also the easiest things to manufacture. And about how the signals we dismiss, an old man's eyes, a tone of voice in a language we do not speak, the feeling that something is wrong before the mind has found its reason, are sometimes the ones that are carrying the actual truth. He walked for an hour through streets that still did not conform to the logic he kept trying to apply to them, past the church and the bakery and the cats, and eventually found himself, without having planned it, at the corner nearest the restaurant. He did not go inside. It was too early. The place was not yet open. He stood at the corner and looked at the window where he had sat with Victor and his wrong bread and his misplaced confidence, and he thought about how close the whole thing had come. 2 more days. 2 more days of comfortable meetings and good food, and a translator who selected his words with such care, and it would have been over. His phone buzzed. A message from Caroline. Paperwork received and filed. Window extended. Legal team engaged. Well done. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he typed back, "It wasn't me." He sent it, and put the phone away, and kept walking. The gray sky had started to lighten at its edges. Not dramatically, not in the way skies lighten in films, all gold and sudden, just the slow and steady way that morning always comes, 1 degree at a time, almost invisible, the difference between one moment and the next too small to see, until you look up and notice that somehow, at some point, without your having witnessed it, everything has changed. The day Nathan Cole had planned to leave Tbilisi arrived with clear skies and a cold that surprised him. The kind of cold that only late autumn produces in the Caucasus. Dry and precise, going straight to the bone without the theater of wind or rain. He stood outside the hotel at 7 in the morning, with his one bag at his feet and his coat buttoned, and breathed the air, which tasted faintly of wood smoke and something mineral, the particular flavor of a city built near mountains. He did not have a car booked for another 2 hours. He used them. He had called the restaurant the previous evening, using the translation application and the young waiter's halting English as a bridge, and had asked if Luca would be there in the morning. The answer had come back in pieces, imprecise, but had resolved into yes. He walked to the restaurant. The city at 7 in the morning was a different city than the one he had been moving through in the afternoons and evenings. Quieter, more inward. The streets belonging to people who were going somewhere specific, rather than people who were simply in the city. Workers, delivery drivers. A woman in a bakery apron unlocking a door with her elbow because her hands held 2 large trays. A man walking a dog that had the expression of a dog who has decided that enthusiasm is undignified. The restaurant door was unlocked when he arrived. Inside, chairs were still upside down on most of the tables. Legs in the air, the room in that in-between state of a place that is not yet what it will be in a few hours. The smell of coffee was coming from the kitchen, which meant someone was already there. Nathan stood at the door. Luca came out from the kitchen. He was wearing the white shirt again, or possibly a different one that was identical, and he was carrying a cloth he had been using to polish something. And when he saw Nathan, he stopped in the way that people stop when they have been expecting something, and the expecting has not made the actual arrival any less significant. They stood in the half-prepared restaurant looking at each other. Nathan had brought an envelope. Inside it was a handwritten note, translated with the application, and then retranslated back to English to check the conversion, written in both languages on the same page. He had written it 3 times before he was satisfied with it, not because the words were complex, but because the simplest true thing is often the hardest to put down in a form that does not reduce it. What the note said was this: "You did not know me. You had no reason to help me. You came back 3 times and told me the truth, when the person who was paid to do that job was using it to do the opposite. Because of you, something that would have been very wrong was stopped. I do not have a way to repay this that is equal to what you did, but I want you to know that I understand what it cost you to try, and that it worked, and that I will not forget it." He gave the envelope to Luca. Luca took it and held it in both hands. He did not open it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something you already know the substance of, but want to let land properly before you let it in. Then he set the envelope down on the nearest table and reached into the pocket of his trousers and produced a small item wrapped in paper and handed it to Nathan. Nathan unwrapped it. It was a piece of church kala, the Georgian candy made from grape must and walnuts, a long tapered shape like a dark amber candle, traditional, sold everywhere in the country, but still, in this context, something chosen rather than grabbed. Nathan looked at it. He looked at Luca. Luca said something in Georgian, just a few words. He said them in the same direct, unhurried way he had said things across the restaurant 3 days ago, aimed precisely. No wasted movement in the language. Nathan did not have his phone out. He did not reach for the translation application. He did not need to. Some things do not require translation. Not because they are simple, but because they are prior to language. They exist in the register of the body, in the posture and the face, and the particular quality of attention one person can give another, and they arrive fully intact regardless of which sounds are attached to them. Nathan understood what Luca had said. He said thank you in English. Then he said it again in the only Georgian he had learned from the application, badly pronounced, almost certainly wrong. Madloba. Thank you. Luca smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who does not perform happiness but lets it appear when it is genuinely there. They stood for another moment in the restaurant, with the chairs on the tables and the coffee smell from the kitchen, and the morning coming through the window in long flat bars of cold white light. Then Nathan picked up his bag, which he had set down near the door, and Luca walked him to it, and Nathan went out. He stood on the pavement outside, and breathed the cold mountain mineral air, and looked at the church kala in his hand. He put it carefully in the outer pocket of his bag. He walked back to the hotel. At the airport, 2 hours later, he sat in the departure lounge with coffee he had bought from a stand that charged 3 times what the same coffee would cost in the city. He did not mind. He sat with it, and his bag between his feet, and watched the departures board rotate, and thought about the past 5 days, which had covered more distance than the miles between London and Tbilisi would suggest. He thought about Victor Hale. In the 48 hours since Nathan had stopped answering his calls, Victor had tried 4 more times, then twice more, then once, and then stopped. What would happen to him was in the hands of people whose job it was to make those decisions. Nathan found, when he checked his feelings about this carefully, that he did not feel satisfaction. He felt something flatter and more factual, the sense that a thing had been corrected, which is not the same as justice and is not the same as resolution, but is the best available version of both. He thought about the Georgian partners, Georgie and the 2 men in their dark suits. Patricia Reeve had called him the previous evening with a partial answer to the question he had asked her, the one she had said was above her pay grade. 2 of the 3 partners, it appeared, had not known about the third-party arrangement. The third had. What happened with the partnership going forward was, genuinely, above Nathan's pay grade now. He had handed it back to Caroline and the people above her and walked away from it with clean hands. He thought about Caroline saying, "Go back." 2 words, delivered across a phone line from a desk in London to a hotel room in Tbilisi, and on the other end a 34-year-old man who had spent the previous 20 minutes telling himself he was reading too much into the face of a stranger. Go back. He thought about the bread that had seemed wrong from the first moment. He had never figured out what it was about the bread. He had eaten a piece of it, and it had been perfectly good. Whatever the wrongness was, it had not been in the bread. It had been in him, in the part of him that was already registering something it had not yet put into words, finding the nearest available object, and attaching its unease to it, turning a feeling into a thing. The body, it turned out, was doing its job the whole time. His flight was called. He picked up his bag and joined the line, and moved through the gate and down the tunnel and into the aircraft, where he found his seat by the window, and sat down, and stowed his bag, and looked out at the gray tarmac of the Tbilisi airport, which looked very much like the tarmac of every other airport in the world, unremarkable in the specific way that transition points always are. The aircraft began to move. He watched the city recede, or rather he watched the edge of it recede, the last fringes of it, some apartment blocks, a road, a bridge over something silver. The city itself was behind him now, already becoming the thing it would be for the rest of his life. A place he had been, a story he had lived through, something he would tell people, and have them nod, and say that is extraordinary and mean it. He reached into the outer pocket of his bag and took out the church kela. He held it, and looked at it for a moment. Then he put it back, carefully, the way you put back something you are not ready to consume yet, something you want to keep whole a little longer. The aircraft climbed. Below, the mountains appeared, the ones that had given the city its cold and its mineral air and its particular quality of light. They were enormous and uninterested and permanent in the way that only very old things are permanent, the way that makes everything human seem exactly as brief as it is without making it seem small. Nathan looked at them until the clouds came. Then he sat back and closed his eyes. He thought about what it means to be in a room where you cannot speak the language, and cannot verify what is being said, and cannot know, with any certainty, whether the person whose voice is the only bridge between you and everyone else is using that bridge honestly. He thought about the specific vulnerability of that, the way it does not feel dangerous because you are comfortable and fed, and the person bridging the gap has a good suit and an unhurried voice, and has given you no reason to doubt them yet. He thought about an old man who had decided, for no calculable reason, that a stranger's well-being was worth the trouble. He thought about trust, about what it actually is, stripped of its usual markers. Not a suit, not a voice, not the perfection of someone's English sentences, something older and less readable and harder to perform. Something that lives in the face, in the return, in the willingness to come back a third time even when the first 2 were dismissed. He thought, I went to Georgia to conduct a business negotiation and came back with a different education entirely. The clouds thickened and the mountains disappeared. Nathan Cole flew home through a gray and indifferent sky, carrying a piece of candy in his bag and a debt he could not repay, and the particular kind of gratitude that does not go away because it is attached not to a favor but to a person, a real and specific person, who had lived 60 or more years in a city Nathan had spent 5 days in, who made his living in a restaurant, who could not be reached by phone and could not be sent a gift through an app, who would go to work tomorrow and the day after in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbows and serve food to people passing through and would not, Nathan was certain, consider what he had done as anything requiring recognition. That, somehow, was the part that stayed. Not the fraud, not the legal paperwork, not the near miss. The part that stayed was that. A man who helped because the alternative was not helping. A man who came back because he had said the thing and it had not landed, and so he came back and said it again and again until the time ran out or the other person finally heard. Nathan did not know if he would ever return to Tbilisi. He thought he might. He thought that if he did, he would go to the restaurant with the wrong photographs and the right food, and he would sit at the table by the window, and he would eat the bread, and he would tip correctly this time, because by then he would know the conversion. And if Luca was there, he would nod. And Luca would nod back. And that would be enough. It would be more than enough. It would be exactly what it was, two people on opposite sides of a language, who had once, in the middle of something that could have gone very wrong, managed to find a way to speak to each other anyway. The aircraft leveled off. The seatbelt sign went dark. Nathan put his head back and let the hum of the engines fill the space where all the words had been, and after a while, without meaning to, he slept. And this time he dreamed. He dreamed about bread and mountains and a room full of chairs with their legs in the air, and morning coming through a window in long flat bars of cold white light, and somewhere in the dream a man in a white shirt was moving through the room with the quiet economy of someone who has learned that unnecessary movement is a form of waste, setting the chairs right, one by one, turning them back the way they were supposed to go. Nathan watched him do it. In the dream,